I am slightly changing the direction of my channel, but before I really get into the meat and potatoes of why, I want to first talk about competition and self-defense. These are both things I've discussed on the channel before, but I've tended to do so from a fairly removed point of view. That is to say, I've not really given my own personal views and experiences on these topics, even if some of it can be inferred from my content. So let me start here with competition. I've really got to stress that I'm not at all opposed to competition in martial arts, not even a little bit. In fact, I think trying to resist competition is sort of silly in this niche because it always finds a way to surface anyway. Having said that, I've never really cared about competition either. Again, I don't really have any ideological reason for this, and I'm largely a proponent of competition existing. I am just emphasizing this because my channel covers a lot of Aikido, and I am very aware of how a certain slice of the Aikido population sees competition as somehow ethically dubious or something silly like that. I have personally competed in the past in point sparring, in some full contact sparring tournaments, and one judo tournament, I believe. I was never the type of competitor you'd point to as a rising talent or anything, though. Overall, I would self evaluate as average. I got a few medals at these local events and pretty quickly tossed them in the trash while cleaning up, or I just misplaced them somewhere. This was all 10 or 15 years ago by now, I think. I don't have any super articulate reason for feeling this way about competition either. It's just apathy. The feedback loop in martial arts, for me, was never really about accumulating titles, but about pushing my body physically and mentally to be able to achieve things I once would have been incapable of. Yes, competition can absolutely factor into this loop. I'd argue it does for many people, but I grew up in a network of sister gyms, so I always had 50 to 100 unique people to work with. From where I stood, there really wasn't any reason to travel downstate or across state lines for up to 3 to 4 hours, then pay money to compete and get like 3 rounds in at a tournament that, let's be honest, no one really cares about in the grand scheme of things. I personally don't even remember the names of these events. This year, I will be 30 years old, and while I could compete in something, the odds of a breakout career probably existed over a decade ago for me at this point. And that's assuming I ever had the innate qualities to even ever have been a notable professional. I strongly suspect that I did not. And like I said, I never really had the passion for it, even if I did possess the qualities to be competitively viable. Not only am I still pretty apathetic about competition today, but I've also got 2 languages to juggle learning. I already travel internationally up to 2 times a year for family reasons, and none of that factors into the normal obligations adults who are trying to make a family have. What I will say about competition, however, is that I've come to believe winning them is probably one of the most over-evaluated things in particularly American martial arts culture. After World War I, America started to shift her views of fitness from being more about daily utility and longevity towards sport competition and physical aesthetics. By the end of World War II, this transition was more or less complete. Initially, I don't think this was necessarily a terrible thing, at least not by itself. My issue with it is that it's been taken to a frankly horrific extreme, in my opinion. I've had people tell me that, for example, there is PED use for local tournaments these days. Now, I could rant and rave about PED use, but let me just try to cut to the chase. Even if we found out tomorrow that PEDs had zero negative health effects and were legalized across all competitive sports, I'd still be staunchly against them. Why? Because rather than being purely about sport, their use creates a parallel competition in which athletes now have to continuously try and min-max their cocktail of PEDs. A competition that was about pure sport is now often about sport plus the chemical arms race between whoever is supplying and designing PED programs. And yes, I know all about the whole "it just speeds up recovery, bro" argument, but call me old school. A part of competing is knowing how to manage your own damn recovery. If athlete A takes better care of himself than athlete B, then athlete A would and should have an advantage. The fact that we've come to a place now where some find this to be an acceptable state of affairs is something that I feel great embarrassment over coming from the US. To think that about a century ago, people did fitness to be healthy and helpful to their fellow man. And now, today, we've slid into this hedonistic and fucking vain pattern of sport culture. It is the highest order of disgraceful. I don't even partake in the whole PED thing, and I feel shame about it. I don't have much direct interaction with these kinds of habits, but I will say that I've traveled to and lived in a handful of countries outside of the US, and I have never felt more like a foreigner in certain hyper-competitive MMA and BJJ gyms based in America. There is a concerning acceptance for this kind of thing there. We might speak the same language, but we clearly do not share the same values. The other issue I see with competition is the fetishization of competitive fighters, and I guess competition itself, more broadly speaking. I want to make clear here that there really isn't such a thing as a professional fighter per se. There are only two reasons why such a career is even possible. The first is that people are entertained by you, and the second is that you are representing your country. Fighting professionally isn't that different from being a stand-up comedian or a minor employee on a diplomatic mission. All of this, too, of course, leads right back to money and status. Mostly money and status for people and entities who are not, in fact, the athletes bleeding in the ring. And keep in mind, even what I just described to you isn't really possible unless you're in the top 1% of fighters. Most people simply are not good enough and never will be good enough to make a sustainable living fighting. Nor am I getting into the risks here of permanent injury, CTE, quality of life in later years, and so on and so forth ad nauseum. I very much endorse competition. I think it is inevitable, and I think that it can absolutely be healthy for a person. But I've seen a pretty clear shift towards obsession and mischaracterization over it in recent years. I could also point to more minor things like people asking what the competitive record of coaches are, for example, as if coaching isn't a different job from professional fighting. There are plenty of professionals in all fields who might be incredible at what they do, maybe even singularly so, but make for absolutely horrible teachers. Yet the obsession with competition compels people to ask these really stupid questions. My point here is that the culture of competition today has grown in a direction that I am very dissatisfied with, and I was already not too into the competitive scene a decade ago. As for self-defense, I've been in at least one encounter that I consider pretty serious. I've been in a couple other self-defense situations, but I don't think they were quite as big a deal. The serious one, though, happened about 5 years back. At the time, I'd been training for some 20 years in various martial arts. The techniques that helped me come out on top, pun intended, were side control and keisagatame. That's it. Just shifting between those two pins for like 15 minutes. Pins, I might add, that you are taught really early in most grappling styles and can probably be adequately relied upon after just a couple months, at least against people of similar skill level to you. Now, yes, the never-ending problem with self-defense is the infinite what-ifs. What if there were more than one attacker? What if the attacker outsized you? What if there was a weapon involved? My answer to all these, though, is that there wasn't more than one person. He did outsize me, and there was no weapon. The thing with self-defense is that I think many who carry it as a banner downplay the fact that you can't actually prepare for everything, and that there are simply just some situations that you are far more likely to lose. You could be the best martial artist in the world, and a knife to the back that you never saw coming would kill you all the same. This doesn't mean I think training for self-defense is a waste of time, much like how I don't think competition is a waste of time. However, I think if average Joe Schmo wants to learn how to defend himself, he can probably do so just by picking an art that spars and taking it really seriously for about a year, give or take a few months. Against the average, untrained person that is about your size and about your weight and carrying no weapons, you should pretty much be able to curb stomp that person every single time with that kind of a training background. This is what I would largely recommend to most people who want a time-efficient approach to self-defense. Now, yes, there is much more you can learn and focus on after that 1 year introduction or whatever. But we also have to keep in mind here that there will ultimately be diminishing returns. We also have to remember that every encounter is different, and knowing a lot of things is not the same as being able to implement a lot of things in real life. On top of that, I'd suggest that most self-defense oriented programs are designed pretty poorly. Like, if the instructor can't fill you in on local laws, common criminal behaviors, and so on and so forth, then is this school really about self-defense? Because these things are important to know. Just because you win the fight on the street does not necessarily mean you will win the fight in the courthouse. For me personally, though, I'm not crazy interested in martial arts as self-defense. I think I'm sort of about as covered as I ever will be, and I now live in a country where criminal violence is fairly rare, all things considered. Could I get jumped? Sure, but then we are right back into the spiral of what ifs. The fact is that there are a certain number of circumstances a person just cannot prepare for. I live in an area right now that they say a massive earthquake could rend fissures into any year now. No amount of martial arts training will help me punch my way out of that problem. In fact, I suspect this is why a lot of people worship professional fighters too. Many people, especially young men, want to imagine that there is a way to live in which most of life's problems can be defeated in single combat. It's simple, it's sleek, it's masculine, and it's just not real. You can't punch or strangle addiction, or depression, or loneliness, or debt, or isolation, or any number of other issues, nor can every physical adversary always be overcome. I really believe so many people come to martial arts because of its perceived simplicity as a solution, and because they feel like it will help them take control in some way. The secret is that getting good at martial arts should teach you that things actually aren't simple, and you're very rarely in control. You might be wrestling with an opponent, but that person is far less substantial an adversary next to the real antagonists of existence: loss, fear, resignation, and the ravages of age. I chose to talk about competition and self-defense here because they are broadly seen as the two quote-unquote legitimate reasons to do martial arts. The confession that I am referring to in the title of this video is that I've never done martial arts to be a competitor or to defend myself. Maybe in the back of my mind I toyed with those ideas, and like I said, I did compete from time to time, but these were ephemeral flirtations. I started doing this because my parents forced me to. I stayed in my teens because my hormone-addled brain convinced itself that this was a pathway to impress girls, and I continued into adulthood because martial arts were a comfortable setting for me to practice Japanese language and culture once I moved to Japan especially. In the brief gaps between these major motivations, I continued mostly because I think it was just what I'd always done. I started doing this when I was 5. I don't have many memories before putting my feet on a mat. I don't do martial arts. I live them. I have lived them. I'll continue to live them. I don't think there is a me without them, at least not this version of myself anyway. Keep in mind, too, that I don't envision my training as a mere hobby or recreation. It's difficult to express in words, but I probably think about martial arts more than anything else in a day. If I have downtime, I'm most likely running through something martial arts related in my head. It isn't just a twice a week thing that I do for fun. This has always been frustrating to me, especially as an adult, because the popular assumption is that if you aren't competing and you don't care about self-defense, then you are disqualified from being a serious martial artist. Probably unsurprisingly to you at this point, I find that assertion to be a load of horseshit. Anyway, I've just come back from 2 weeks or so of mostly internet-free vacation. I was not that far from Siberia for that time, and while civilization wasn't too far away, it's about as cabin in the woods as one can feasibly get without cutting all ties. It was a nice time for clarity and reflection, at least when I wasn't scrambling to prevent frostbite. I really spent a lot of time considering what I want from my training and, by extension, what the Tengu channel is going to be going forward. The answers I came to are the following. First, I want to train to be healthy. I'm not old, but I will be one day. I don't want to be that super stiff old guy on the mat, nor do I want to be my own martial arts teachers because for all the deep respect I have for them, they have knee replacements and hip replacements and reconstructed ACLs and collarbones and so much more going on. That is my first priority. I very much want to get back to the 1880s view of fitness, which is to train to be in good shape for oneself and one's community. I know I cannot convince everyone to get on board with that approach, especially in the modern context where it seems like this idea is almost maligned as inferior in a sense. But as I've outlined this whole video so far, competition and self-defense really aren't where my heart is. Second, I want to get back in touch with what I've really felt training to always be about, at least for me, which is pushing my body to do things that it just couldn't before, period. I'm not doing this to defeat another person or for a medal or to be recognized on social media or as the best guy in the room, but to just be a better me. To that end, for Aikido specifically, I want to take what I love most about that art to its logical conclusion. I don't think I've ever really spoken about what I actually love the most about Aikido on this channel all that much, but it's break falling. I love soaring through the air, and I love the kind of mental toughness of doing it over and over and over again. I love the perseverance that is so baked into that experience. Is this kind of training martial? No, not really. But is it hard? Is there a technical element to it? Yes, there absolutely is, and way more than the popular view of Aikido on the internet would have you believe. As for what I mean by taking that concept to its logical conclusion, I'll save that for a future video. Third, I do want to explore my training as a physical culture, something I've brought up before on the channel. In my opinion, one of the great shames in America is how foreign martial arts are so often deculturalized and cut down to just the techniques. I've seen a lot of backlash online for things like bowing or using foreign terms or whatever else. To a degree, I get this. It's being taught in English and in a Western context. But at the same time, I see learning about other cultures and adhering to these principles to be an excellent antidote to what I view as an increasingly degraded culture in the West. I'm not really arguing here that Japanese culture or something else is better, for example. Trust me, I have a laundry list of criticisms about Japanese culture too. I'm just saying that Western culture has become so much about me, me, me. Everything has to be optimized, posted on social media, and materialism is probably at an all-time high. The irony of me posting about this on YouTube too is not lost on me, but I feel there are few other spaces where this trend can be so effectively criticized. So, I want to delve into the history, origins, aesthetics, and heritage of my practices more. not necessarily because I always like or agree with them, I don't, but because I've always found putting oneself in a completely different worldview as one of the most profoundly beneficial things a person can do for personal growth. It is far too easy to live in a self-curated, algorithm-assisted bubble these days. I really believe it's made people fanatically polarized, narrowly educated, dopamine addicted, and altogether very self-indulgent. I know many cannot be convinced of my perspective here, but I really cannot recommend enough that people go learn another culture. Even the weird customs that you think are bogus, go participate in those, because the point is that it isn't about you. If you can manage to do that through martial arts, even in some small way, then all the better. Finally, I want to train because I love the process. Maybe this is the most important reason of all, actually. I know I'm laying the criticism of modern culture on thick here, although this channel has never really shied away from that. I'm sure my longtime viewers know this. But I am so exhausted of everything constantly needing to be for something else. I already work for a living. In my free time, I am allowed to do shit that I just enjoy. There doesn't need to be an asterisk or a caveat or justification for it. Now, of course, you cannot be consumed by it either. I'm not advocating pleasure for pleasure's sake all of the time. I'm a big proponent of self-discipline. But I am arguing that leisure is natural. It's a healthy part of being alive, and it doesn't need to be rationalized. If you want to train so you can do crazy high jump kicks, martial effectiveness be damned, then go for it, my friend. Go and become the ninja kicker the 7-year-old version of yourself always wanted to become. You don't owe me or the internet or your friends an explanation for your joy. Importantly here, though, for me and for anyone else who might be thinking like me, is that this type of training isn't really for an outcome. Sure, longevity, doing cool things, exploring culture, and all that other stuff I mentioned, but the point here is to do it because the doing is nourishing. Not because you want to show off on social media, not because you want a medal, and not because you want to feel safer walking home at night, but because doing it is enough on its own. Even that other stuff, even if it didn't provide you with greater health and longevity. You don't need to rationalize it that way. If you enjoy the process, that's enough. One of the things one of my martial arts teachers always used to say, especially when I was younger, is that the point of life is joy for its own sake. And I cannot agree more. How often do we frame life as this linear progress where I'll be happy after I get employed. I'll be happy after I make so much money, after I get a girlfriend, after I make a family, after I do this and that. When really you should be trying to figure out how to be happy right now in spite or even because it's flawed. Be happy with what you do because it makes you happy. Enjoy the process. Try to embrace joy for its own sake. And that's hard, by the way. I'm not saying it's easy. You can't flip a switch and do this. But I do think it is something to aspire to. So to conclude, what does this mean for the channel? Well, I feel like I've said most of what I want to say about martializing Aikido. That's really the big one. My content is out there now. It isn't going anywhere, and people can take it or leave it. I will continue to post some martially focused stuff here and there about Aikido. This isn't like an absolute retirement from that topic, but I think in broad strokes, I have said what I wanted to say. In place of that, I want to dive a bit more into certain historical, cultural, and philosophical topics that run parallel to the martial arts themselves, not just Aikido, but martial arts more generally. As for my own training, I'm really discarding the idea of everything I do needing to be martial in preference of doing things that I just really like doing. I still view this shift as participating in martial arts, but it will definitely be more art than martial. I know some people get really hung up on the term martial arts. They'll argue up and down for days that it's about war and functionalism and fighting and all these things. Now, this is far from historically or philosophically true, but I'm not even going to try and argue that on a logical basis. I think I've pretty much done that on the channel too at this point, and there will still and always will be people that just don't believe that. But instead, I'm just not going to apologize for this shift because, with all due respect, it's my channel. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch. When I start posting videos of this training that I have planned, and I do plan to post said videos this year sometime, I'll be happy to reiterate that you really should not copy me if you're worried about a fight. This is not stuff I would use in sparring. That isn't the point. It's just about doing cool athletic stuff that I feel really pushes me physically and helps me grow. Nor do I want anyone to interpret this shift as me rescinding certain past opinions or videos. I still believe Aikido could be a lot more martial, for example, although I have and will continue to maintain that the techniques found within that art are never going to replace something like a single leg takedown or Uchimata in terms of consistency. Like I said, I'm not removing any of my previous content. I stand by that stuff, and it's there for people interested in training that direction. I still probably will train that way myself from time to time too, but this whole video has really been about my priorities changing. Finally, I want to point out that this is not a knee-jerk decision, but has been a long time coming. My videos on arguing that martial arts are not just for fighting and the one on physical culture were kind of already hinting at this trajectory. I fully understand that this might turn some people off to my stuff. No big deal, and no hard feelings. It just feels like it's finally time to make this change, and if you want to follow me while I do it, I'd be more than happy to have you. If not, I cannot recommend enough the Martial Arts Geeks channel, the Modern Aikidoist podcast, Kazushi Kev's channel, and the Aikido Silverdale channel, all of which are fiddling with the concept of a martialized Aikido in their own ways with various amounts of focus. In fact, even if you still follow me, these are good channels to subscribe to, links in the description. Again, I will probably continue to post about that topic, just less than I have up until now. All right, I think that's everything from me. I'm going to try and get back into an upload schedule here, and I will see you guys again very, very soon. Thank you, as always, for watching. There is no Tengu channel without you, and welcome to 2025, guys. Excited to see what the year brings. All right, catch you next time. Peace.